Did you know one of Nintendo's most prestigious studios, Retro Studios, wanted to make a Final Fantasy Tactics style Zelda game for the Nintendo DS called Heroes of Hyrule? Retro pitched it to Nintendo in 2004, around the same time they were finishing up Metroid Prime 2, but Nintendo passed on the project, so the game got scrapped early on. Did You Know Gaming managed to get a hold of the full 22-page document from former Retro employees while researching the last Zelda video about their scrapped spin-off starring Sheik. Today, we're going to look at Heroes of Hyrule in its entirety. The gameplay, artwork, a story that sounds a little like Breath of the Wild, and some Retro Studios behind the scenes. Let's start at the beginning. Link is not the main character in Heroes of Hyrule, although he does make a surprise appearance as an NPC. After the cover and some artwork, the third page introduces the game's story. It says, 100 years ago, 3 heroes defeated an ancient evil and sealed it away in a magical book. For many ages, the people lived in peace and freedom, free of the scourge that had tormented them for so long. Until one day, when the book came into the hands of a young boy. A few pages later, there's a more detailed plot outline. Think of it like the prologue at the beginning of most Zelda games, describing events in the past. There's 16 pieces of art in the pitch, but we're going to add some of our own art to help visualize parts of the story that are only told through text. We'll make a note on screen so you know which ones were commissioned by Did You Know Gaming and which ones were made by Retro. 100 years ago, Ganon captured Princess Zelda, and Link ventured off to save her. But after an ambush, Link fell into the hands of Ganon's minions. 3 of Link's friends, who are the titular heroes in Heroes of Hyrule, went on an adventure to rescue him. The 3 heroes were Dunar the Goron, Seraph the Rito, and Krell the Zora. Dunar's a gruff, tough fighter who embodies the Triforce of Power. He's the strong, silent type, but with few words he reveals a surprisingly keen intellect. Seraph embodies the Triforce of Courage, and she's patient, helpful and warm-hearted, while also remarkably brave and fiercely loyal to her friends. She was the first to discover Link got kidnapped, and she was the one who got the heroes together to rescue him. And Krell embodies the Triforce of Wisdom. He's the brains of the party, sort of an arrogant and cynical wisecracker, but that's just an outer shell he uses to hide his soft insides. After many adventures, the heroes defeated Ganon and rescued Link. Then Ganon retreated into a magical spellbook called the Book of Ganon, which he'd previously created as a tool to enhance his evil power. After his defeat, Ganon's spirit got stuck inside the book in a weakened state, similar to how he was trapped in the spirit realm at the end of Ocarina of Time. The heroes tried to burn the book, but it wouldn't catch fire, so they ripped out a bunch of pages and scattered them all over Hyrule to make sure Ganon could never escape. Link took what was left of the book and hid it away for safekeeping. Then 100 years passed. And that brings us to the present, where the game actually begins. The player takes control of a boy named Corey, who gets to know an old man who owns an antiques shop. One day, the old man has to leave town in a hurry, so he asks Corey to watch the shop while he's away. Eventually, Corey discovers a secret room in the shop where the Book of Ganon is hidden. He starts reading the book, which tells the events of 100 years ago, the past, and that's where the tactical RPG elements come into play. Heroes of Hyrule is actually divided into 2 worlds. 2/3 of the game takes place in the past as tactics, and 1/3 takes place in the present. In the present, you play as Corey with real-time exploration and role-playing. Sort of a traditional Zelda experience, but without dungeons or combat. It's more about exploring the town and interacting with the people who live there. This design was written up in 2004, 3 years before Phantom Hourglass. It never mentions touch controls, so we assume Heroes of Hyrule would have used more traditional controls like the most recent handheld Zelda at the time, Minish Cap. According to the doc, Corey does tasks and favors for the town's residents, like delivering items, searching for hidden objects, digging for treasure, and trading sequences. There's also events and minigames around town, like a fishing contest, kite flying contest, a scavenger hunt, and a music contest at the music hall. Corey does all these things to earn or discover lost pages of the Book of Ganon, which he doesn't realize is evil. he just wants to read more of the book's legends. After Corey gets a new page, he returns to the book, inserts the missing page, and it unlocks a new adventure in the past. According to the doc, when Corey discovers the book in the old man's antiquities shop, he literally brings the hero's adventures to life by reading the book, and he begins to relive their quests one by one. Now the game switches over to the three heroes 100 years ago, and plays less like Zelda and more like Final Fantasy Tactics, but more puzzle focused. Dunar's the beefy tank who can lift heavy objects. He's got a hammer for melee attacks, a Deku medallion for summoning a fire spirit, a fire charm that makes all fire sources on the map explode, and a fire shield that makes him invulnerable to fire. Seraph's the fast archer who can fly and change the wind's direction. Her primary weapon's a boomerang that can hit multiple enemies or switches from a distance. She has an invisibility mask for sneaking past enemies, and fire and ice arrows for freezing and burning enemies and objects. And Krell's the long-distance spellcaster who can swim. He can use healing magic, protective magic, boost the party's stats, create tsunamis from anywhere there's water on a map, freeze or thaw bodies of water, and he's got the lens of truth for seeing invisible enemies and hidden doors. The heroes don't start with all of these items and abilities though, they acquire them one by one over the course of the game. They can also obtain more common items that any of them can use, like bombs, Deku seeds, and fairy jars. The heroes are occasionally joined by cameo characters from past Zelda games. The document doesn't name them, but we're going to assume there'd be personalities fans would like, such as Impa, Tingle, or Skull Kid. Some of the heroes' items also allow them to summon new creatures, such as elementals of fire, water, earth, and air. Unlike other strategy RPGs, Heroes of Hyrule doesn't have experience points or a leveling up system. Instead, there's a heavier emphasis on item collection, like a normal Zelda. Quoting page 12, it's turn-based strategy and puzzle solving. The player controls the heroes and their occasional allies in a series of discrete encounters. Although most of these encounters will involve combat, much of the gameplay in the heroes' world is oriented towards solving environmental puzzles in traditional Zelda fashion. Most of the items the heroes can employ have functions in environmental puzzle solving as well as combat. Each adventure isn't just a battle though. You don't play through one page, then you're done and move on to the next one. Each page is more like an area of Hyrule you can return to later. Page 13 says, each area is divided into several distinct sections, or phases, which are separated by environmental puzzles and obstacles. Much like in a Metroid game, these obstacles act as gates to limit the party's progress until they earn the items they need to overcome the obstacles and proceed to the next phase. This design encourages the player to revisit areas he has already explored in order to advance the hero's quest. The three-phase system would probably be easy to understand during gameplay, but might be a bit confusing as a wall of text. So before we break down how it's explained in the pitch, we'll try to simplify it with a comparison to Ocarina of Time. Let's say Kakariko Village and Death Mountain together are one area. You can enter Kakariko Village unrestricted, but there are some further areas you can't access right away. This is Phase 1. Later on, you get a letter from Zelda, which lets you open the gate in Kakariko that leads to Death Mountain. Death Mountain is Phase 2. In order to progress any further, you have to go to an entirely different area of Hyrule to learn Saria's song, then come back to Death Mountain and play it for Darunia to get the Goron's bracelet. Now you can destroy the boulder to enter Dodongo's cavern, which is Phase 3. You've gradually gained access to all three phases of one big area, each with its own environmental puzzles, enemies, heart pieces, etc. In this game, that's one page in the Book of Ganon, one adventure. Okay, now here's how it works in Heroes of Hyrule. The pitch doc shows artwork for a sample area, and a step-by-step description for how one adventure plays out. The areas on the map marked 1, 2, 3 are all Phase 1. Dunar uses the Goron gauntlets to move a boulder, which reveals a hidden tunnel underneath. The heroes go through the tunnel and into a nearby tower where they pull a lever to lower the drawbridge. They cross the drawbridge and into the courtyard and fight some enemies. That's the end of Phase 1. There are certain items you need to access Phase 2. the areas on the map marked 4, 5, 6. Seraph has to use the wind charm to make the wind blow north, then she flies over the moat while the other two float across with Deku leaves. Once across the moat, there's more enemies to fight, then Dunar throws a boulder to break a wall, providing an entrance into the castle proper. Inside, they fight a wizard, then Krell uses his ocarina to bring a statue to life. It gives them the invisibility mask to sneak past some enemies in a different adventure to obtain the fire shield. They then come back here with the fire shield for phase 3, which is a boss battle against a fire giant. After beating the boss, the adventure's complete. Corey collecting pages in the present unlocks new adventures for the heroes in the past, and the reverse is true as well. The pitch says, completing adventures and battles in the hero's world rewards Corey with new knowledge that he can use to unlock new parts of his own world. For example, the heroes speak to a great Deku tree. Corey later recognizes it as the tree in the center of his own town's commons, and he can now speak to it, although it's 100 years older. Or after Corey reads about the heroes playing an ocarina melody in the past, he can then use the same melody to win a music contest. There are other items to collect besides just the pages themselves. Many of the book's pages have item-shaped outlines, and by finding items that fit into them, Corey can give the heroes extra health, magic, and so on. The heroes can also find special items, like heart pieces, to permanently boost their max health and magic. There's also equipment to find, like armor, shields, and weapons to raise their other stats, like strength, defense, and movement speed. Clearly, the designers were trying to make a unique hybrid, marrying elements of a classic Zelda title with Final Fantasy Tactics. The document's pretty explicit about that fact, saying, quote, Heroes of Hyrule is a story-driven game of exploration, puzzle solving, and strategic combat in the Zelda universe. Designed for the Nintendo DS, Heroes of Hyrule will appeal to fans of games such as the previous Zelda titles and Final Fantasy Tactics. Why do this? Heroes of Hyrule expands the rich Zelda universe with new characters, storylines, and play mechanics. It also injects exciting new themes into the proven handheld strategic RPG market segment, ultimately providing a product worthy of the Nintendo name. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance came out on GBA a year earlier, garnering high review scores and going on to become the 22nd best-selling GBA game of all time, right up there with the Minish Cap and Metroid Fusion. And it seems Retro Studios wanted a piece of that pie. Did You Know Gaming spoke to one team member who was willing to go on record, Paul Tozer. You might remember him from the recent video about Retro's other Zelda project.
I feel the statute of limitations has expired on a lot of this because it's 15 years ago, and I'm interested in telling the truth.
In 2004, Retro had just finished Metroid Prime 2, but they didn't really want to be a studio that only makes one series. Some of them were getting a little burnt out on Metroid, and it's a little risky having all your eggs in one basket. Paul said, Retro's senior producer Brian Walker was always pushing, like, what's our DS side project gonna be? And he somehow pegged me as the guy who was gonna lead the engineering effort on Retro's first Nintendo DS game. Paul's a big tactics fan and has some experience designing strategy games, so he came up with an idea called RPG Tactics and pitched it to Retro's higher-ups, but it didn't gain traction. However, Mark Pacini took the opportunity to pitch a new concept. If that name rings a bell, it's probably because Mark Pacini was the lead designer on Metroid Prime, and the director of Prime 2 and 3. Paul said, Mark took a look at that and then said, hey, let's make a different kind of tactics game in the Zelda universe. So from my initial idea of RPG Tactics, it evolved into a game that was much more of a puzzle, RPG adventure game. When you've got these three heroes, plus the young boy, and you've got to figure out how do I use the abilities of these four different characters to get past lots of different obstacles. It turned into a totally different game. It no longer had any resemblance to RPG Tactics. That was just sort of the spark that got this whole thing going. But Mark and I worked together, and I wrote up most of these documents. This was more adventures and puzzles than tactics and RPG, because that's the direction Mark really wanted to take it. 3 years after all of this happened, Tactics Advance got a sequel on Nintendo DS, which again was well received, though not quite as well as its predecessor. If Heroes of Hyrule had made it into full production, it probably would have beaten Final Fantasy to market, and gotten a sales boost thanks to that Zelda connection. According to the document, Heroes of Hyrule would have differentiated itself from other tactics games with 4 key features: the focus on item collection over experience points, interactive environments, the back and forth gameplay where events in the past and present unlock new possibilities in the other, and the mini-games like fishing and interacting with the town's NPCs. Mark and Paul worked on the project along with Retro's in-house translator and an artist whose name Paul unfortunately can't remember after all these years. Did You Know Gaming has reached out to Mark on several occasions, but he wasn't interested in talking about old projects. Did You Know Gaming also reached out to all of Retro's artists, but the ones who would talk couldn't remember which artist worked on Heroes of Hyrule. The copy we got our hands on only has a few phrases in Japanese, but Paul remembers physical booklets that were fully translated into Japanese so that they could pitch it to Nintendo. Unfortunately, they passed on the project. Paul said, "We sent it over to Nintendo SPD and got an immediate, 'No, you're not doing that.' To this day, I do not know why. They just didn't seem to have any interest in that gameplay concept, which is too bad. It was a really solid concept and had the potential to be something great. Unlike the Chic spin-off Did You Know Gaming covered in the last video, a playable prototype was never developed for Heroes of Hyrule. That would have required the green light from Nintendo. So all that's left of Heroes of Hyrule is this pitch document. It's worth noting that one of the meeting rooms at Retro Studios is literally called the Lost Woods. A lot of fans wonder what goes on inside Retro. It's a pretty secretive company, perhaps even more secretive than Nintendo. So we'll lay out their Zelda timeline. They worked on Heroes of Hyrule for about a month and pitched it to Nintendo in May 2004, right around the same time they were finishing up on Metroid Prime 2. Some former Retro guys told Did You Know Gaming a lot of the staff were kinda burnt out on Metroid at this point, and wanted to move on to a new series. But Satoru Iwata asked them to make one more Metroid to finish up the trilogy and show the world how great first-person shooting could work with the Wii pointer controls. We're not saying that's why Heroes of Hyrule was rejected. Retro could have made both games, but the point is, franchise fatigue was even worse as they were finishing up Prime 3. That's when Retro spent 9 months programming a Chic prototype for the Wii, but Nintendo rejected that pitch too. A week or two later, Retro leadership announced that the next game wasn't going to be Zelda, it was going to be Donkey Kong. Paul told Did You Know Gaming, "Leadership basically got us in that big meeting room, sat down and said, our next game is going to be bringing back the Donkey Kong Country franchise, and that's what we're doing. I'm not going to hear any objections. The decision is final." And I can't blame them for wanting to make that, because I think they spent a lot less to make Donkey Kong than any of the Metroid games, and probably made 2 or 3 times more profit. So I can't blame them from a financial perspective. Paul was really only interested in making Metroid and Zelda games though, so he resigned a few days later. Quite a few other Retro Studios members left around the same time. That's the end of Retro's story, at least as far as Zelda's concerned. But what about the game's story? According to the document, over the course of the game, Corey gradually collects the missing pages scattered around town, not realizing the consequences of doing so. When he inserts the final page, Ganon comes back to life. Ganon's about to kill Corey, but at the last second, the 3 heroes come out of the book as well, and the 4 of them fight against Ganon in an epic final battle. After the dust settles, the old man who owns the antiquities shop returns from his trip, accompanied by 3 elderly friends, a Goron, a Rito, and a Zora. Corey immediately recognizes them as the 3 heroes from the book, and if you hadn't figured it out yet, surprise, it's revealed that the old man was actually Link all along. If you want to hear more about that cancelled Chic game, Did You Know Gaming got a ton of exclusive info on it a few weeks ago, which you can watch right now by clicking or tapping the box on screen. And if you're a Zelda fan, why not check out my channel, Zeltic, where I cover anything and everything related to Hyrule, from theories to tier lists. Thanks for watching.